So this is going to be our last video for the Congress unit, and we're going to start out by talking about incumbents and the advantages that come with being an incumbent in an election. So incumbency is running for re-election as opposed to running for the first time. So you are a person that has already held the office that you are running for. So for example, in the 2020 election, President Trump is the incumbent. Mitch McConnell is the incumbent in the Kentucky Senate race. So some of the advantages to being the incumbent. One, media coverage. Okay, so obviously you're going to be able to put your face out there more if you're already holding a position. You are going to have a record of providing for a state or a district. So if you aren't running for the first time, if you've already held office, you're going to have some sort of record of what you have done for your state or the district that you serve. An established donor network. So in many cases, especially in terms of Congress, representatives and senators have served for years. So they've been able to establish this donor network and have the funding that they need for a campaign. And then name recognition. So if you are already in office, already hold office, there's a good chance that your voters, your constituents, are going to be much more familiar with you, what you've done, what you stand for, as opposed to maybe an opponent that is running for the first time. So the incumbency advantage is going to be greater in the House, where members run for re-election every 2 years. So let's talk a little bit more about incumbents. So again, we said that they have the advantage of experience and money. So if they've already served in this position before, not only do they have experience in this official capacity, but they've also established that donor network to get those funds that they need for campaigns and advertising. So if you are watching the news or watching TV at all during this time, you have probably seen lots and lots of campaign ads. So you can only imagine how expensive campaigning can be, and being an incumbent comes with those advantages. Incumbents also have what's called a franking privilege, which is the free use of the mail for communication with their constituents. So let's talk about some of the challenges of representation. So after you are already elected to office, what are some of the challenges? So one is that constituents expect their representatives to add their voices to debates and deliberations in Congress. So when you elect someone into a position, you want them to be your voice, to make decisions that would be best for you, for your community. Voters want their representatives to be effective in Washington, but they also want them to come home and explain their work and their plans. Okay, so you want your representatives, your senators, to come back to the state and to the district and talk about what it is they're doing and what they're trying to do to best serve you. So legislators' voting decisions. There are several factors that a representative or a senator might consider when they're voting on a law. The first would be constituent interest. How do constituents feel about this? Okay, representatives and senators are there to do exactly that, represent and serve the people of their state or district. So what would their constituents want? How would their constituents want them to vote? The next is a member's political party. So a representative or a senator might be swayed to vote a certain way based on how other members of their party are voting or how party leadership wants them to vote. The next could be input from congressional staff. So maybe they got lots of information from congressional staff and they're going to vote a certain way based on that information. Campaign donors. So you want to keep that money rolling in, okay, from those donors. So you're going to vote to keep those donors happy. That could be another factor to consider. And then presidential persuasion. So is the president persuading votes a certain way? All right, so all things that legislators have to consider when they are voting. So let's talk about some different roles that legislators, so representatives or senators, might take on when they're representing their constituents. The first is the delegate role. And if they see themselves in this role, then they feel like their main duty as a member of Congress is to carry out their constituents' wishes. Okay, so they have been elected to office to serve, and their main purpose is to carry out the wishes of their constituents. Another role is the trustee role. And this is where members of Congress feel like they should act as trustees, making decisions based on their knowledge and judgment. So this might mean that their choices don't please the majority of his or her constituency, okay? Maybe that member of Congress has access to more information and they feel like they are more informed to make decisions based on their knowledge and judgment. And then the last one is the politico role. And here is where members of Congress are going to balance their choices, so how they feel about things or using their knowledge, with the interests of their constituents and parties in making decisions. So this is essentially taking the first two roles and putting them together into a role. Okay, so balancing their own interests and their own knowledge with the interests of their constituents. So delegate role, they're there to carry out constituents' wishes. Trustee role, they're making decisions based on knowledge, information, and politico role is a combination of the two. So next, let's talk about partisanship. So members of Congress are usually going to try to support their political party's goals if possible. Okay, so partisanship in Congress has been increasing over time. So voting records are going to show a trend away from bipartisanship, where the two parties, so the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, are working together. All right, so there is an increase in partisanship. And partisanship can lead to gridlock. So gridlock is when it becomes very difficult to pass legislation because the two parties are so against each other. There can be difficulty in passing laws. Gridlock is going to become even more likely in a period of divided government. And a period of divided government is when the majority party in Congress is different than the party of the president. So we actually have that right now before the 2020 election. So President Trump is a member of the Republican Party. In the House of Representatives, it is a majority held by the Democratic Party. Okay, so we currently have a divided government. Partisanship can also result in a lame duck period, which means there is little achievement in terms of legislation or the president's agenda. And that is the end.